Executive Arab hires. African maid to be his wife for 8 days. But what happened next left him speechless. He needed a wife for just 8 days. No emotions, no strings attached, just a flawless performance to secure a billion-dollar deal. So when billionaire Arab executive Khalil al-Sayed offered his quiet, hard-working maid, Amina, a life-changing sum to pretend to be his wife during a high-stakes business negotiation, she couldn't say no. What neither of them expected was how real it would start to feel. What began as a cold transaction in a golden palace turned into stolen glances, late-night confessions, and a connection neither of them had ever dared to dream of. But as the final day approached, Khalil was forced to confront a truth more terrifying than failure. He didn't want her to leave. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss any of our deeply emotional and inspiring stories that touch the heart and leave you thinking long after the video ends. Get ready to witness a story of unexpected love, dignity, and the unbreakable strength of a woman who was never meant to matter, but ended up changing everything. The palace was silent, save for the soft echo of Amina's footsteps against the marble floors. Her worn shoes made barely a sound as she carried the silver tray through the west wing. Her dark eyes lowered, her braided hair neatly tied back. She had walked these halls 1,000 times, serving quietly, blending into the background like a shadow among the chandeliers and silk curtains. But today felt different. The call from the head butler had come early. The sheikh wants to see you, alone. No one, not even the senior staff, was summoned alone to the office of Khalil al-Sayed. He was the elusive lion of Dubai's corporate jungle, a man whose fortune came from oil, real estate, and luxury holdings. People said he could make or break empires with a single word. Amina had barely spoken 5 words to him since she started working in his estate 9 months ago. Now, as she approached the carved wooden door, her heart pounded like it wanted to escape her chest. The door opened before she knocked. "Come in," said a deep, accented voice. She stepped inside and was instantly swallowed by the scent of oud and leather. Khalil sat behind an enormous desk, dressed in a tailored navy thobe, his dark beard trimmed to perfection. His gaze met hers, sharp, unreadable, and far too intense. "Sit," he said. Amina sat at the edge of the velvet chair, gripping her hands together tightly in her lap. "I have a proposition," Khalil began, his tone businesslike. "My family is demanding I present a wife before the board meeting next week. Without one, the deal I've spent 2 years negotiating will collapse." Amina blinked, unsure if she heard him right. "I need someone who will play the part," he continued. "Elegant, respectful, and invisible unless spoken to. 8 days only. You will be compensated generously." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. "You will live here in the master wing. Wear what we provide. Speak when needed. Pretend to be the woman they want to see at my side. Amina felt the room tilt. Why, me? She asked softly. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Regret, perhaps? Because you already know how to disappear, he said, and because I know you need the money. Amina swallowed hard. She hated that he was right. Her mother's medical bills back home in Senegal were piling up, and the little she earned barely kept the lights on. This amount, this offer, could save her family. But still, to lie? To fake a marriage? I'm just a maid, she whispered. He leaned forward, his eyes locking on hers. For 8 days, he said, you'll be my wife. The silence stretched. Amina's mind spun with images. Her mother smiling again, her little brother going back to school, the dignity of no longer being powerless. Will you accept? She didn't nod. She didn't speak. She simply stood up and said, what do I need to do first? A shadow of surprise passed over Khalil's face. Then he stood too. Follow me. He led her through a hidden corridor that opened into a different world. Gold-trimmed doors, a private lounge with velvet walls, a walk-in closet larger than her entire family home. These are now your chambers, he said. Your transformation begins tonight. My tailor will come at 7. You'll meet my mother tomorrow. Amina stood frozen as the door closed behind him. It was happening. She had stepped out of her uniform and into someone else's life. But what she didn't know was that Khalil hadn't chosen her just for convenience. There was something in her quiet strength, in the way she carried her pain without complaint, that haunted him more than he dared to admit. And as Amina looked into the mirror for the first time in that grand room, she didn't recognize the woman staring back. What she didn't realize was how dangerously real this game would soon become. By morning, Amina was no longer a maid. The soft fabric of the emerald green dress hugged her figure in ways she had never allowed before. Her curls had been styled into an elegant updo by the stylist who spoke French with a Moroccan accent. The makeup artist had trembled when she saw Amina's flawless dark skin, whispering, "You don't need much. You're already art." But Amina didn't feel like art. She felt like a fraud. She stood by the window of the master suite, looking out over the courtyard where a gold fountain shimmered under the desert sun. In 8 days, this would all vanish. She would return to her old uniform, her quiet room near the servants' quarters, her silence. There was a knock on the door. Then Khalil entered without waiting. For a second, he said nothing. His steps slowed, his eyes scanning her from head to toe. Not in a vulgar way, but as if he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. His gaze lingered on her neckline, her bare shoulders, her eyes. "You look," he began, then stopped. Amina stood tall, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "Is this suitable?" she asked. Khalil cleared his throat and looked away. "It'll do," he muttered. But Amina had seen the way his jaw had clenched, the way something in him shifted. "We'll be having breakfast with my mother," he continued, walking past her. "She'll want to know everything, how we met, how I proposed, where we plan to live. Smile, but not too much. Speak when spoken to. And remember, the ring is on your finger for now, but you must never forget what this is." "A performance," she said quietly. He looked back at her. "Exactly." But there was something uncertain in his eyes, like the line between real and pretend was already starting to blur. They walked side by side through the corridor, their footsteps echoing off the polished stone. Amina's heart pounded as they approached the dining room, a golden chamber with high ceilings and an impossibly long table. At the far end sat an elegant woman in a silk hijab, her spine perfectly straight, her eyes sharp as a falcon's. This was Mother Al-Said, the queen behind the empire, and the gatekeeper of Khalil's destiny. She looked up and narrowed her eyes at Amina. "So," she said in Arabic, which Amina understood but barely spoke, "this is the girl you chose to shame us with." Khalil's body stiffened beside her. "Mother, this is Amina," he said, switching to English. "My fiancée." There was a long silence. Then, without a word, the older woman gestured for them to sit. Amina lowered herself into the chair, her fingers trembling beneath the table. Mother Al-Said didn't touch her food. She stared at Amina like she was a riddle she didn't want to solve. "And what does your family do?" she asked, her tone clipped. "They live in Senegal," Amina said calmly. "My mother used to be a teacher." "And your father?" "Gone," Amina said simply, "since I was 9. Mother Al-Said's lips thinned. "And what do you love about my son?" Amina froze. Khalil's fork clinked against his plate. She took a breath. "He hides behind his power, but he listens when no one thinks he's listening." Khalil looked at her, startled. "I love that he doesn't need to speak loudly to be heard," she added. Silence. Then the older woman stood up slowly. "I'll be watching you," she said coldly. "Both of you." When she left, the room felt 10 degrees colder. Khalil turned to Amina, something unreadable in his expression. "You didn't have to say all that." "I know," she replied softly, "but it felt true." He looked at her, truly looked. And something unspoken passed between them, sharp as lightning and just as fast. "Come," he said, standing. "We have another rehearsal this afternoon." But as they walked away from the table, neither of them could deny it anymore. This was starting to feel less like acting and more like something dangerously real. The days passed in a blur of tailored gowns, staged public dinners, and carefully rehearsed smiles. Amina moved through Khalil's world like a ghost wrapped in silk, present, beautiful, but never truly seen. Or at least, that's what she believed. Until that night. They had just returned from a formal event hosted by the Crown Prince's Investment Council. Amina had smiled graciously, stood at Khalil's side as cameras flashed, and answered all the expected questions about how they met with the stories they had agreed upon. She had memorized every detail, every cue. But when they got back to the palace, something changed. Khalil didn't retreat to his private office like usual. Instead, he followed Amina as she walked barefoot across the marble floor, holding her heels in one hand. Her feet ached. Her soul ached more. "You handled my mother's questioning tonight better than most trained diplomats," he said, standing by the window with his jacket draped over one shoulder. His tone was calm, but there was something in his eyes, a storm just beneath the surface. Amina looked at him. "I've been answering difficult questions my entire life," she replied softly. Khalil stared at her for a moment, then set his jacket down and walked closer. "Why haven't you asked me anything?" he said suddenly. "About what?" "About me, my life, my past. Why I need to fake a marriage just to get a deal signed." Amina hesitated. "Because it's not my place." "Isn't that what a wife does?" he said. "Ask, care, know." She turned to face him. "You didn't hire me to care, Khalil. You hired me to perform." He took another step closer. "But you're not performing anymore, are you?" The silence between them was heavy. The golden light from the chandelier danced on the walls, painting shadows across their faces. She could feel the heat of him now, the space between them narrowing. "I think about you more than I should," he admitted in a low voice. "When you laugh at the things I say, even when you try not to. When you walk into a room and forget you're the most stunning thing in it." Amina's throat tightened. "Don't do this." "Why not?" "Because this ends in 5 days," she whispered. "And you don't fall for the maid you hired to pretend." He reached out and gently tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered at her jawline, and for a second she closed her eyes. "I didn't hire you to feel this way," he murmured. "But you do," she said, almost breathless. And just like that, the line they had both clung to began to dissolve. He leaned in, just enough for her to feel his breath on her skin. Their lips didn't touch, but the air between them vibrated with something electric. Amina's heart pounded. She wanted to run. She wanted to stay. Khalil pulled back first, as if waking from a dream. "You should rest," he said, his voice suddenly formal again. "We have another meeting tomorrow." And just like that, the distance returned. She nodded without a word and walked toward the bedroom. But before she crossed the threshold, she stopped and turned. "You asked why I haven't questioned you," she said quietly. "Maybe I'm just afraid I'd like the answers too much." She closed the door behind her, leaving Khalil staring at the space she had just occupied. In that silence, for the first time in years, he felt something foreign, something terrifying, longing. But longing came with risk, and Khalil al-Sayed never risked what he couldn't control. The next morning, Khalil sat in the boardroom of the Al-Sayed Tower, his eyes on the panoramic view of downtown Dubai. Skyscrapers rose like glass spears into the hazy sky. He should have been focused. Today was the final round of negotiations for the largest merger of his career. But all he could think about was her, Amina, the woman he had once overlooked. The maid who had spoken so little, but now lived in his thoughts louder than anyone ever had. He adjusted his cufflinks as his business partners entered. Sleek suits, firm handshakes, polite small talk. But beneath the surface, there was tension. The deal depended on one thing: Khalil appearing as a man of family, of stability, of legacy. That was why Amina existed in this performance, to be the perfect partner beside him. But something was changing, and people were starting to notice. "She didn't come with you today?" asked Mr. Al-Mutairi, the elder chairman, raising an eyebrow. "She's at the charity visit we arranged with the royal committee," Khalil replied smoothly. "My fiancé's presence there is just as strategic." The man nodded approvingly. "Smart. She's poised, graceful. I was skeptical, but now, perhaps you found your match." Khalil forced a smile. He hated how much it pleased him to hear that. Meanwhile, across the city, Amina stood at the entrance of a children's hospital, surrounded by cameras and curious eyes. She wore a modest white dress with a soft beige headscarf, picked by Khalil's team, and held a bouquet as she greeted the director of the foundation. But beneath her composed smile, something twisted. These children were like her brother, forgotten, quiet, strong. She bent to speak to a little girl with missing teeth and burned scars on her hands. The girl handed her a drawing, a stick figure family with a woman who had hair like Amina's. "You're beautiful like my mama," the girl said. Amina smiled and felt tears prick her eyes. She hadn't expected this. To be touched, to be changed, to be seen. But later that afternoon, as she returned to the palace, her world tilted. Waiting for her in the front salon was a woman, tall, elegant, Arab, with piercing hazel eyes and flawless makeup. "Khalil isn't here," Amina said politely. "I'm not here for him," the woman replied coldly. "I'm here for you." Amina's heart dropped. Who are you? I'm someone who knows exactly what you are, she said, and what you're not. The woman stepped closer, her words like knives dipped in perfume. You think wearing designer clothes and smiling for the cameras makes you a wife? You're a placeholder, a prop. Amina stood tall, but her hands trembled. I was with Khalil for 2 years, the woman hissed. He ended it without a word. Then suddenly you appear. Do you honestly think a man like him would ever choose you? Amina said nothing, because deep down she wasn't sure herself. The woman walked away, leaving behind a silence that felt like a wound. When Khalil arrived home that evening, Amina was no longer in the mood to rehearse. She sat by the fountain, barefoot, her dress wrinkled, her eyes distant. You didn't tell me about her, she said quietly when he approached. Khalil froze. What did she say to you? That I'm nothing, Amina said. That I'm just filling a space someone else left behind. His jaw tightened. You are not nothing. Then what am I, Khalil? She asked, rising to her feet. Because I can't keep playing this game if I don't know where the truth begins and the lie ends. He stepped closer, but she stepped back. You wanted someone invisible, someone obedient. But you didn't hire a shadow. You hired a woman, Khalil. And whether you like it or not, I feel things. He looked at her with something raw in his eyes. So do I. But the moment shattered like glass. Amina turned and walked away. And Khalil stood alone under the starlit courtyard, realizing the one thing he couldn't control was the one thing he couldn't afford to lose. And the clock was still ticking. 4 days left. The following day came with silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy silence that presses against the chest and makes every breath feel borrowed. Amina remained in her suite, not out of duty, but to protect herself from the unraveling feelings she no longer knew how to contain. Every look Khalil gave her felt like a lie. Every word he hadn't said echoed louder than anything he ever had. And yet, she missed him. Downstairs, Khalil was in his study, staring at a single envelope on his desk. The seal was broken. The contents had torn something inside him days ago, but he had hidden it from the board, from his mother, and from Amina most of all. Because the letter changed everything. It wasn't from a business associate. It wasn't from a woman. It was from his father. The man who had walked away from Khalil and his mother when he was 12, who had started a second family in Lebanon and never looked back. The man whose abandonment had shaped Khalil into a fortress, unbreakable, untouchable, emotionally barren. The letter, written in trembling handwriting, said only one thing that mattered. I am dying, and I have one request. That you come meet your half-sister. She deserves to know your name. Khalil had tossed it aside the first day he received it. But now, Everything felt different, especially because of Amina. It was her strength, her gentleness, her quiet wisdom that had begun to open parts of him he thought were long dead. And that scared him more than anything. He walked to her suite just before noon. Amina didn't expect the knock. She opened the door slowly, expecting another staff member, maybe a tailor. But it was him. He looked exhausted. "Can I come in?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. He stepped inside, glancing around as if seeing the room for the first time. "I owe you the truth," he said, "about everything." "I'm listening," she replied, but her arms remained crossed. He pulled the letter from his jacket and handed it to her. As she read, her expression shifted from confusion to quiet shock. "Your father," she whispered. "He abandoned us. I swore I'd never speak his name again. And now, he wants me to come meet a sister I never knew I had, in Beirut, before he dies." Amina looked up, eyes soft. "And you're going?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I'm afraid of what I'll feel." "Maybe that's exactly why you need to go." He studied her, then shook his head with a bitter smile. "You always say the right thing, even when I don't deserve it." There was a pause. Then he said, almost in a whisper, "I never meant for any of this to become real. But now, I can't stop seeing you even when I close my eyes. I think about you when I walk into a room. I hear your voice when everything is silent. And that scares me more than any board meeting, any empire, any threat." Amina blinked, speechless. "You don't have to say anything," Khalil added quickly. "I know this wasn't supposed to happen, and when the 8th day comes, I'll let you go, if that's what you want." She stepped closer. Her voice was quiet but firm. "What I want is for you to stop hiding from your pain. Stop pretending you don't need anyone. You say you're afraid of feeling, but Khalil, feeling is the only way you'll ever be free." Khalil stared at her, heart pounding, and for the first time in years, he didn't argue. He just took her hand. That night, Amina watched from the balcony as his private jet lifted into the dark sky, bound for Lebanon. He hadn't asked her to wait. He hadn't made any promises. But the way he had looked at her before leaving, as if she was the only thing that still made sense in a world full of questions, that look had said enough. And as she placed the now familiar ring back onto her finger for one more night, she realized she no longer feared the end. She feared never seeing him again. The air in Beirut was thick with salt and sorrow. Khalil hadn't walked these streets in almost 2 decades. The old neighborhood was smaller than he remembered, narrower, more weathered, but the ghosts felt the same. He didn't need directions to find the house. It was as if his feet still remembered the pain. He knocked once. The door opened slowly, revealing a girl no older than 17. She had deep brown eyes, soft curls tied in a loose bun, and a nervous smile that disappeared the moment their eyes met. "You must be Khalil," she whispered. He nodded. "You're my sister." "Yasmina," she said, stepping aside. "He's inside. He's not doing well." The room smelled of old books, medicine, and unfinished conversations. On the bed lay a man, thinner than Khalil remembered, with a graying beard and eyes that once held fire. Now they held only regret. "Khalil," the man rasped. Khalil stood at the doorway, frozen. So many things he had wanted to say. Accusations, curses, demands for answers. But none of them came. "You're taller than I imagined," the man said, coughing. "Stronger." "I didn't come for compliments," Khalil replied, his voice cold. "I didn't expect you to come at all," the man whispered. "But I'm glad you did." Khalil glanced at Yasmina, who lingered quietly near the window. She didn't speak. She didn't interrupt. She only watched, her presence like a living question. "I hated you," Khalil said finally, walking to the foot of the bed. "You left my mother. You left me. You made me believe that people only stay when it's easy." The man nodded, eyes wet. "I know. And I can't fix what I broke. I just wanted you to know her, Yasmina, your sister. She's innocent in all this." Khalil turned to look at her again. She was watching him, not like a stranger, but like someone who had always hoped he'd show up. He didn't say much more. He didn't stay long. But before he left, he placed a hand gently on Yasmina's shoulder. "If you ever need anything," he said, voice soft, "I'm your brother. You're not alone." When he returned to Dubai 2 days later, the city felt different, less alive, colder. But he knew the real reason. She was gone. Amina's room was empty. The dresses were gone. The scent of her rose oil had faded from the air. At first, he thought she had simply gone for a walk. Then he found the note. "Thank you for seeing me, for letting me be more than a maid, even for a moment. But this was always supposed to end. You have your world, Khalil. I was never meant to belong in it. Amina." His heart clenched. He read it again, then again, and something inside him cracked. That night, he stood alone in the courtyard where she used to sit by the fountain. He could almost see her, barefoot, thoughtful, radiant without knowing it. He remembered her words. "You don't fall for the maid you hired to pretend." But he had. Completely. Irreversibly. And she was gone. The following morning, Khalil ignored 3 urgent calls from the board and 1 from his mother. He didn't care about meetings. He didn't care about deals. He got into his car and drove to the workers' district, the place where she used to live before all this began. He had no plan, no address, only the memory of where the staff buses used to stop. He walked the streets, asking quietly. Faces lit with surprise when they recognized him. Some pointed. Others whispered. Then finally, an old woman nodded and said, "The girl with the quiet voice and tired eyes. She's back, but she won't talk to anyone." He knocked on the rusty door of the tiny apartment. No answer. So he spoke through the wood. "I went to Beirut," he said. "I met my sister. She has your courage, and I only saw that courage because of you." Inside, Amina's breath caught. "I was never meant to need anyone," he continued. "But now, I can't imagine my life without you in it. Not for 8 days. Not for one night. For as long as you'll have me." Silence. Then the door creaked open. Just enough for their eyes to meet. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Because in that moment they both knew. The performance was over. And what remained was real. Khalil didn't return to his empire the same man. And Amina didn't return to her silence. They chose each other, not because of duty, not because of a deal, but because something true had grown where neither expected. 1 month later, she stood beside him again, not as an act, but as his wife, for real. And this time, there were no scripts, no timelines, no goodbye. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it with someone who still believes in unexpected love and second chances.